great to have all 5 of our FCC commissioners with us today. We want to welcome you and generate a bit of a crowd. There's some interest in some of these subjects, I think, here, Senator Nelson. So let me just start with my remarks, and then I'll yield to my distinguished ranking member, the senator from Florida, Senator Nelson, for his remarks, and then we're going to ask the FCC commissioners, if they could, to confine their remarks to about 3 minutes so we can get to the question and answer, which I think what everybody here around is interested in. So welcome to today's oversight hearing on the Federal Communications Commission. Every day, every single American relies on some part of our nation's vast communication system: the internet, the telephone, television, GPS, or the radio. An efficient, effective communication system is the bedrock of our nation's economy and is the tie that binds together our 21st century society. The FCC sits right in the middle of America's digital world, and this is even more true following the FCC's recent decision to turn our nation's broadband internet infrastructure into a public utility. It is apparent from that action last month the FCC is also potentially threatening an unpredictable agency as it struggles to operate under legal authority that was designed nearly 100 years ago and not seriously updated in decades. To be clear, today's hearing is not a response to the Title II order, but clearly no discussion about the FCC can ignore one of the most significant and most controversial decisions in the agency's history. My views on this subject are well known. I believe there should be clear rules for the digital road with clear authority for the FCC to enforce them. I put forward a draft bill with my House colleagues to begin the legislative discussion about how best to put such rules into statute. Like most first drafts, our draft bill is not perfect. I invite members of this committee and stakeholders from across the political spectrum to offer us ideas on how we can improve it so that the final draft can win bipartisan support and provide everyone in the internet world with the certainty that they need. The FCC's recent action accomplished the exact opposite. Rather than exercising regulatory humility, the 3 majority commissioners chose to take the most radical, polarizing, and partisan path possible. Instead of working with me and my colleagues in the House and the Senate on a bipartisan basis to find a consensus, the 3 of you chose an option that I believe will only increase political, regulatory, and legal uncertainty, which will ultimately hurt average internet users. Simply put, your actions jeopardize the open internet that we are all seeking to protect. The tech and telecom industries agree on few regulatory matters, but there was one idea that unified them for nearly 2 decades. The internet is not the telephone network, and you cannot apply the old rules of telecom to the new world of the internet. 3 weeks ago, 3 regulators turned their backs on that consensus, and I believe the internet and its users will ultimately suffer for it. The debate over the open internet illustrates the importance of the FCC, which makes it all the more amazing that Congress has not reauthorized the FCC since then Representative Markey's bill was passed a quarter century ago. Indeed, the FCC is the oldest expired authorization within this committee's expansive jurisdiction, a situation that I intend to rectify in this Congress. Today's hearing marks the beginning of the Commerce Committee's efforts to write and pass legislation to reauthorize the FCC. I know that contentious matters like Title II divide the membership of this committee, but FCC reauthorization is an area where I believe Republicans and Democrats can and should work together. Wanting the FCC to be an effective, efficient, and accountable regulator shouldn't be a partisan goal. I know members on both sides of the aisle have common sense ideas to make the agency more responsive to the needs of consumers, Congress, and regulated companies alike, and I look forward to hearing their suggestions and views. And I look forward to hearing the Commissioner's thoughts today about ways Congress can help their agency improve. Writing a new FCC reauthorization bill should not be a one-off effort. It is my hope that the committee will get back to regularly authorizing the Commission as part of its normal course of business. In order to do that effectively, the committee must be diligent in its oversight. As such, the Commission should expect to come before this committee again. How the Commission works is just as important as what the Commission does. In addition to discussing important communications policy matters, I hope members will use today's hearing to explore the Commission's operations, processes, and budget. For example, the FCC has requested $530 million for fiscal year 2016. This funding level will be the highest in the Commission's history. That alone raises eyebrows, particularly when American households continue to do more with less in this stagnant economy. But the FCC also wants to fund this increase in part by raiding the Universal Service Fund. Paying for record high budgets by siphoning money from USF is a dangerous precedent. While members of this committee may have varying views on the USF's efficiency, scope, and growth, one thing I think we can all agree on is that its limited funds should not be used as a reserve fund to pay for the FCC's core statutory functions. That's what the Commission's regulatory fees are for. USF funds should pay for USF services, and I don't believe the FCC should jeopardize the stability and integrity of the Universal Service Fund in order to paper over its record high budget request. Given the significant interest in hearing from the Commission today, I do not expect this hearing will be a short one. In order to more quickly get to members' questions, I have asked that all the witnesses limit their oral statements to 3 minutes apiece. The longer written statements will be submitted for the record. I look forward to hearing from our commissioners today in what I hope will be a productive afternoon, and with that, I would yield to my ranking member, Senator Nelson. Thank you, Commissioner Rosenworcel. We have a lot of participation on both sides today, and so as much as we can, try and adhere to the 5-minute rule. I know it'll be hard because we have a lot of interest in this subject and a lot of questions we'd like to ask our panelists today. So let me start by talking a little bit about an issue that's important to me and to my state. And I start by saying that laws and policies that are outdated often lead to rules that are arbitrary, which ultimately limits consumer choice and raises costs. And the current Universal Service Fund rules require a rural consumer to buy voice service from a small rural telephone company in order for that carrier to be eligible for USF support. If the same rural consumer decides to buy only broadband services without a telephone subscription, the carrier is no longer eligible to receive U.S. support for that subscriber's line. This contradicts and undermines the mission of the new broadband-centric USF. It makes broadband more expensive for rural households and increasingly threatens the sustainability of rural communications networks. Last year, Senators Gardner, Klobuchar, and I led letters to the Commission that urged the FCC to propose rules to solve this issue. Nearly a year later, that issue remains unsolved. And so I want to ask each of you a question. I'm going to take the approach of my predecessor, Chairman Rockefeller, and ask for a commitment from each commissioner. And the question very simply is, will you commit to solving this growing threat to rural communications by the end of this year?
Aye.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, we have unanimity now, sir.
Yeah, this was designed to get you guys all on the same side of an issue. I want to, I want to make just a observation too. I know, the Commission's order is the subject of the day, in addition to other things that we'd like to talk about as well. I have a father who's 95 years old. He lives in my hometown of Murdo, South Dakota, with a population of about 500 people. And he's a user of the internet. And it strikes me, if I had to suggest to my dad that we're going to regulate the internet that he uses with a law that was passed during the Great Depression when he was 14 years old, I think he would probably be flabbergasted. And essentially that's what we're doing. We're trying to take something that was designed for a very different era and squeeze it and trying to fit it into a modern technology. And one of the issues that statute allows for is rate regulation. Now, I know that, Chairman, you have contended that no rate regulation is going to result from the Open Internet order. Well, let's just say hypothetically that someone files a complaint at the FCC alleging that the rates that they're paying an internet service provider for broadband service are not just and reasonable under Section 201. And I'll just say, as Commissioner Pai, as a result of Title II reclassification, isn't the Commission legally obligated to investigate and rule on that type of a complaint?
Mr. Chairman, that is absolutely right. The order opens the door to complaints under Section 208, both to the Commission and to courts around the country. And at that point, it will be up to the Commission, if it receives such a complaint, to adjudicate whether or not a rate is just and reasonable. And it's notable that the order limits itself only to saying that we don't engage in ex-ante regulation, things like tariffs and applying a methodology, but it says nothing about ex-post regulation. And I think that is why ex-post rate regulation is a very real prospect.
So, if that circumstance were to happen, Commissioner Rosenworcel, if the Commission judges the rates to be unreasonable, could the FCC required the ISP to adjust its rates or to impose fines and forfeitures on the ISP?
Well, we don't have such a case before us right now, but I think it's important as a matter of due process that any provider that's having difficulty succeeding in getting the interconnection they need to provide service has the opportunity to complain to the Commission and seek resolution.
So the answer is yes, the FCC could.
We'll see when
Adjust
we
its
have a
rates.
complaint before us.
Right. But I'm just saying.
Sure.
It's it. Yeah, I'm not saying you should. I'm saying you could. Commissioner Clyburn, if in a rate complaint case, how will the FCC decide if a rate is unreasonable or unjust?
So given the same context that you set up, one of the examples that I gave in my opening statement was on inmate calling. And that affirms and should affirm to us all that the bar is incredibly high when it comes to the scenario that you put forth. We waited over 10 years to even think about addressing what was obviously a market failure. So again, we won't know, like my colleague says, until something's before us. But it passed its prologue. That bar is extremely high for that case to come to the resolution in which you put forth.
But you would have the discretion to determine if a rate is unjust or unreasonable.
We have an obligation, I believe, to look at any complaint or anything filed before us and make a decision accordingly.
And if that decision is made, if that conclusion is reached, the FCC could, in that circumstance, act in a way that would adjust rates or impose fines. Does that?
I jokingly say that even though I'm from the South and we have the other South Carolina.
Thank you.
And that we have been known to, there have been very interesting people who have predicted the future. I unfortunately do not have that talent.
Well, I would have a hard time, I would think, explaining or how that adjudicatory process would not be rate regulation. You know, like I said, granted, the chairman has said that's something on which they would forbear, but if a case is brought forward, it strikes me at least that the FCC has an obligation to respond. And I also think that things that are decided by this commission certainly don't bind future commissions, which is why we've argued all along that working constructively on a legislative solution that sets clear rules of the road is the best approach to doing this. But that being said, my time's expired. Senator Nelson. I want to, just in terms of FCC reauthorization, very quickly, it got asked once before, and a couple of you responded to it, but I want to ask the question of all the commissioners, is that something you think we ought to do? Is it time to reauthorize the FCC?
That's a decision that you make. The Congress has made the decision not to thus far. If you want to change that decision, you're the Congress, you make the rules.
I agree that's up to Congress, but I also agree that it's always good to review federal agencies and practices.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Congress's decision, but I do agree it's time to move forward with something.
I yield to the expert body.
Mr. Chairman, can I say 25 years is a long time. Thank you for raising
yeah,
it. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. Your hair was a different color back then. You called it out.
Jaws.
And very quickly, one reform that you would recommend that we make, or a top reform, as you think about FCC reauthorization? Anything come to mind?
I've put a number on the table already and talked about them in my statement. But one that I haven't talked about I think there's a need to have an accountability of our enforcement procedures. We issue a number of NALs and judgments in that case, but there's no actual tracking of what actually happens to the money. Are we actually getting the money that we're actually, assigning penalties for? And I think that'd be very helpful. I tried to get the material for this hearing, and the information just came back, well, we don't track that. And I just think there's something wrong. We should know that if we're penalizing somebody, is it actually being paid? What is the ramifications for this? So that's one thing I would add to the multiple layers that I've already talked about.
Now, I've been talking about this for a number of years, but Sunshine Act reform, it makes our deliberative process a bit cumbersome, particularly as it relates to the joint board and conference. And so Sunshine Act reform would be top of my list.
I'll say in addition to the proposals in the Process Reform Act and Consolidated Reporting Act, I would add reform of Section 5 of the Communications Act to ensure that the full commission has an opportunity to weigh in on serious and substantial policy questions, which currently are often resolved on delegated authority by the bureaus.
I think we need a program to bring in more engineers. We have more wireless technologies evolving faster than at any point in human history. And I think that if we were able to bring in more engineers to review some of those new technologies and equipment authorizations, which are multiplying, we would be a lot faster at making sure that innovation makes its way to the marketplace.
I think this is a series of good ideas, and I'd like to be much more forthcoming and more detailed in response with a laundry list, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, look, been a long day. I appreciate your indulgence. I would just say in closing, I think the issues that we've discussed and debated today, you can tell there's strong feelings about. I still believe, maintained for a long time, that we're better served in the long run if we can provide clear rules for the road. And I think clear direction of the FCC, but limited, tailored, to me is a better way to approach the issue of how best to achieve an open internet. And as I mentioned before, we've got a bill, chatted with Senator Nelson and others on the committee about it. I would hope going forward that the Commission could play a constructive role, not discourage us from legislating, and but perhaps be helpful if we decide to do something that would put something in statute that I think, again, addresses the issue of uncertainty and lawsuits, which is going to plague, I think, this order for some time to come, that you all could play a contributing role to that and not work against that.